Okay, hello everybody. My name is Aoife Long, and I'm delighted to be sharing this talk with you about social media. So, I'm going to be sharing my own story about how I have used social media in the area of breastfeeding to, I suppose, bring attention to my work and build connection with other people in and outside of the area. So, I'm going to go through a little bit about my background, tell you the strategy that I've used, and where I'm at now. So I'm going to start with where I'm at now and then work back. And I want to say a very big thank you to Anya Lavin for inviting me to give this talk to you as well. And I'm looking forward to catching up with you as well on the Q&A if you do have any questions. So it's not so much a training, it is practice and insights. And I've already lost. No, I haven't. Okay, thank you. Right, so you should be able to see that. So this is the proposal to recognise investment in breastfeeding as a carbon offset. So I was very excited to be a part of this publication. Some of the other names on the paper are world leaders in the field: Julie Smith, Roger Matheson, Philip Baker, Nigel Rowlands, Marilyn Waring. Incredible to collaborate with this group of authors. And my role in this paper came about fully, I believe, because of my engagement on social media, but it also couldn't have been predicted. And I think that's kind of one of the difficult things, that you can see the successes, but you can't necessarily guarantee them. So it's kind of it's similar to networking in that you need to do it, but you don't know what comes out of it as a result. So this paper was very exciting to collaborate on. So Julie Smith is an economist. She led the paper. She's done a lot of work on the economics of breastfeeding, particularly calling out how breastfeeding isn't included in gross domestic product, which is an economic measurement, whereas sales of infant formula are, and just the disparity that creates, and also the skewed financial incentives that it creates. So that's part of the problem, and she proposes to address it by using climate financing mechanisms such as the Clean Development Mechanism or the more recent loss and damage mechanism that was agreed at the latest Conference of Parties, to see breastfeeding as a means of reducing carbon emissions and recognise the work that women do in that area as well. So very exciting to collaborate on that. So a bit about me and my own background. So prior to my current research now, I worked in UNICEF in Lebanon around 10 years ago now. And at this stage, this is me, if you can see the mouse there. If not, I'm not sure, I'm kind of second in from the left. So I worked in UNICEF in a technical role. I was in information management officer for humanitarian coordination. And I really enjoyed that work. I really got to see a lot of how UNICEF works and the scale of their operation. And I suppose, like, the big thing that was my takeaway was that policy is where you need to make change. So I was there for 3 years. And when I was looking at what would I do next, I really decided that policy was the area that I wanted to take my career in. So from there, I did my PhD in renewable gas systems modelling and policy. So there I am at the top, submitting my first poster, I think, to a conference. And during my PhD, I got very involved in education and public engagement. So this is a group of people who very kindly helped me to dance my PhD. It's still on YouTube, Aoife Long Dance Your PhD. But education and public engagement and science communication was one of those things that just really helped me get through my PhD. And I think building the skill of talking about my research was also very important, and it fed into my social media use, but social media also helped kind of complement building that skill as well. So again, I'll address this later, but Twitter was quite big at the time, and that's where I would have been most active on social media. To come up with a good tweet and put it out into the world would take around a half an hour to an hour. I think I did actually tweet when I posted this picture on social media that I was, submitting a poster to my first conference. And at the time, there was the 140 character limit. So you really had to be very succinct and put an awful lot of work into it. And, you're starting with 0 followers. So, you're putting something out into that world and feeling all the anxiety, and there's maybe 3 people following you, but you don't get followers until you post and engage. So you really need to be a part of the world of social media to build. You need to gradually build your own platform. So the technical area of my PhD, it was renewable gas policy. So for those of you who don't know about that, renewable gas is gas like natural gas, but produced from organic sources. So grass, slurry, seaweed, willow would be the main crops for Ireland. And I was looking in particular at the emissions calculations. So how much carbon emissions do you save when you use renewable gas compared to conventional fuel? So I think it was around 1 year into my PhD or a little bit longer, I had my son Liam. So there I am with him, and I did breastfeed him, and I struggled. I definitely struggled, and that was quite challenging for me at the time. I went to La Leche League, who I found marvelous and absolutely lovely. And I think I did go to a lactation consultant as well. So, with all the best will and planning and asking for help in the world, I still struggled, and I just found that very difficult at the time. So I went back to my PhD after 6 months. And again, I will say, like the people that did help me were absolutely marvelous. And when I went back after 6 months, UCC, which is where I was studying, they had this map on campus of where, you could use, I think it was like first aid rooms. You could also use them for pumping if you wanted to, or for feeding. And the ERI, the Environmental Research Institute, I asked them for a fridge to store breast milk. They said absolutely no problem. So I really did appreciate the support that I got. But despite all of that support, it just still unfortunately wasn't enough. So I ended up combination feeding, which needed to happen. And, not regretted how hard I found it, but I suppose I felt a little bit let down by it. So on I continued with my PhD, and during one of our regular meetings, my supervisor was talking about how infant formula, Ireland produces 15% of the world's infant formula. And that's a very old statistic now. And those statistics are very difficult to come by because they're seen as commercially sensitive information. So it's not very easy to get it from the Central Statistics Office or anything like that. But he was making a throwaway comment that we produce all of this infant formula. Wouldn't it be great if we could use green gas, displace the natural gas in production, and decarbonize infant formula? So I was sitting in the meeting, having a little bit of a huff, thinking yes, or we could just support breastfeeding because there's so many women around the world that want to do that. So that huff eventually became a peer-reviewed research paper, collaborating with a lot of other authors. But it took a long time to get to that point. But once I kind of solidified the idea that I was going to do this, then I really realized that I'd need to start building the base from when I started the research, so that by the time I was publishing it, that I would have an audience that was interested in it. So I'm going to talk through that process that was very deliberate that I took. So I suppose, first of all, what impact did I want to make? I wanted to look at literally that question of we can use green gas to decarbonize part of the production of infant formula, or we could support breastfeeding. And what point did I want to make? I suppose looking at the energy transition and what's fair. Do we just keep putting more resources into decarbonizing things when people actually want to do something else that also has all these amazing public health benefits? And essentially, it's saying if we just keep going as we're going and just say, okay, let's just remove all the carbon out of it. Carbon is one part of the equation. Is it really a just transition? And I suppose up until now, I suppose a lot of the time when people say just transition, they think about workers in the energy sector and they are going to lose their jobs as we phase out fossil fuels and other carbon polluting forms of energy. And a just transition for them is moving to another role, whether in renewable energy or in a different field, but that they don't lose out because they worked in fossil fuel production and now that's no longer happening and they're out of job. But I was kind of thinking of it in terms of what is fair. So I think that was kind of the impact, like, that big picture impact that I wanted to make. And, I will acknowledge that that type of impact, no one person will make that impact. And it could also take an entire career to get the level of attention that you need to make that impact. But I suppose I just wanted to have a big picture goal for myself. So I was thinking, okay, so who is my audience and where are they? I wanted to, I suppose, get the attention of breastfeeding advocates, and there's an awful lot of you out there and on social media and available to engage with. But I also wanted to think of, policymakers in general. And there is, I suppose, a big trend at the moment in academic research, which is all about having academic research to inform policy and engaging with policymakers, whether through the civil service and systems like that, or engaging directly with politicians. So there's a few different mechanisms that academics can engage in policymakers, but it's becoming more and more of a trend and something that's being built into research proposals and research grants and funding structures. And then environmental researchers. I suppose I hadn't seen in a big way the role of breastfeeding as a kind of a way of reducing carbon emissions. And there's lots of things that, even in traffic, you've the idea of avoid, shift, improve. Can you avoid making the trip, or can you make it in a more sustainable way? Or if you do need to make it, improve the fuel that you're using. But it never came in one of the list of many things that, I suppose, the steps that people can take. And there's also the idea in environmental research and activism that, yes, individual activism or individual actions can make a difference, but those individual actions need to be supported. If you're going to say you need to get the bus, then the bus needs to be reliable. And it's, I would apply that same theory to breastfeeding, that it wouldn't be about telling individual women they need to breastfeed. It's more about having that enabling environment for breastfeeding. So I suppose that was the audience that I wanted to attract. And at the time, Twitter was absolutely massive, and a lot of academics were going on Twitter, I suppose, to kind of build their skills and build their platforms. And I found it so educational as well. So, you learn from other people as well. So, starting out in social media, I was kind of thinking all about what attention did I want? Whereas the more I was active and engaging on it, the more you learn from other people as well, which is, I suppose, what they're trying to achieve. Other people on social media are trying to use their platform to educate me as well. So, it does work both ways, and there are those dual advantages to it. So I suppose this is what I did again in advance of publishing this paper. That probably took me, I don't know, maybe between 6, 7, 8 months to pull the team together, decide, yes, we're going to go ahead and write a paper, start the writing process, collate all the inputs, different versions, submitting it, getting the corrections back. So, writing a paper and getting it published is a long process. So from the start, I was going to talk about breastfeeding on my social media so that by the time publication came around, that I had a platform. So I did want to consider myself a voice in the field. So what I did, I suppose, I started out with supporting and engaging with others in the same field. So when other people were talking about breastfeeding, just literally liking their posts or saying excellent research. And, I do try to be as genuine as I can. Yes, I wanted to build my platform, but I also wanted to genuinely congratulate people who were saying positive things or, presenting at a meeting and, learning from these people all the time. If somebody was publishing a paper, then I can go read that paper. And if it's relevant, then I'm referencing it in my work. So it wasn't just about, I suppose, putting myself and my opinions out there. Was also about learning from other people and seeing. So that's, how I first came to hear of Julie Smith's work and, all of these other prominent voices in the field. And again, just kind of having a consistent voice I felt was important. I'm just going to pause and take a drink. So having a consistent voice, I think, is also important. Social media can be seen as a bit of a cesspit. And I think it is that if you make it that, but I didn't engage or feed with trolls. And like I found it such a positive experience, like as in I wasn't, on social media to fight with anybody. I was on social media to support and uplift other people and learn. And I think, maybe Twitter's not like that now, but at the time, I suppose the algorithm finds you. I feel like it on Twitter, especially, it's working against you. And we can kind of address different platforms again later in the talk, because I think Twitter was a wonderful place at the time for bringing together, say, academics and journalists and people in all these different fields into this one pot to, share work, learn, etc. And I did genuinely benefit so much from it. So this is my paper, Infant Feeding and the Energy Transition. So it's a comparison between decarbonising breast milk substitutes with renewable gas and achieving the global nutrition target for breastfeeding. So again, with academic work, this started out as a notion and a huff in a meeting, but I did need to say, okay, what's realistic? So the global goal for breastfeeding is 50% across the board by 2025. So, my proposal was in 2 countries, in Ireland and in China, look at I suppose, the volume of infant formula currently being used and compare it with the breastfeeding rates in both of those countries and saying, okay, like both of them have breastfeeding rates way lower than that 50% breastfeeding for 6 months, which is, it's an optimum goal to achieve, and it's a World Health Organization public health goal. So I looked at a few different scenarios and, kind of decarbonizing all of formula, reaching the global goal, or, kind of reaching the global goal and decarbonizing the remaining product with infant formula. And again, just, very clearly, the renewable gas portion, I suppose the production part of producing infant formula is around, I think, is like 10% of, causes 10% of the emissions, say, per kilogram produced. Most of the emissions are caused by the dairy farming process, and most of those emissions are from cows belching methane into the atmosphere. So in emissions accounting, we're not just talking about carbon, although it all gets rolled into the one indicator. I'm getting a little bit technical here, but hopefully my science communication background will be kicking in. So when we're talking about carbons and emissions, a lot of the time you're actually counting carbon, methane, and nitrogen, and those are all rolled together to produce a carbon dioxide equivalent. So the methane volume emitted is multiplied by 25 to say, okay, this amount of methane is equivalent to this amount of carbon. And that's how it's calculated, just to make a single indicator. It's a bit of a workaround and it's a bit clunky, but it works for discussion. So most of the potential harm caused from a climate perspective when producing infant formula is caused by the methane that's produced in the dairy part of the production as opposed to the factory part of the production. Now, I still do think this is worth, I suppose, renewable energy is still needed, but it can't be the only part of the solution, especially when there's such a public health benefit, a parent benefit, a parenting benefit, and when women actually want to breastfeed themselves. I think that has to be recognised. And that's what this paper says. Kian-Min Wu, who's on the paper, he's actually a climate philosopher. So we were looking at applying the theory of social justice as non-maleficence, which was a piece of work done by Vittorio Bufacci in UCC. And what that is saying is that social justice, considering the do no harm principle from a social justice point of view, that if we decarbonise infant formula with renewable gas, are we creating a secondary dependent industry on this inappropriate marketing of breast milk substitutes that we all find so challenging to contend with? So it's a fun paper. There's I'll be sharing some links in a little bit about a lighter read in relation to it, but it was fun to get stuck into. Hannah Days, prominent energy researcher in UCC. Maeve O'Connell, also a UCC graduate, now working in the UAE. She's a midwife. Beatrice Smith in Queen's University Belfast, and Jerry Murphy was my supervisor. And, very kind to say, if you want to do this, academic freedom, off you go. And, he was an excellent mentor on the paper as well. So when the paper got published, I suppose I needed to publish the paper. This gets published on, in the scientific press, but I also need to promote it. So, I was posting it on my Twitter feed to the audience that I built up. I got invited to write an article in the press by Deirdre O'Shaughnessy. She's an editor in The Examiner, and just kind of continuing to talk about it, building on further opportunities and further connections. And I suppose from, the background work that I did, again, I'm sure some of you know Malvina from the Baby Feeding Law Group. She reached out to me on Twitter kind of saying, are you interested in having a chat? I see you're kind of talking about this a bit. So, we did have a chat, and she just kind of said, look, she kind of keeps an eye out on people who are in the space. And from there, I suppose once I finished my PhD, I have ended up joining the Baby Feeding Law Group as well and being involved in a voluntary capacity. So it doesn't necessarily directly feed in, but I've represented Baby Feeding Law Group on a sustainable development. What's it called? Is it like Coalition 2030? So, I've gone to some of those meetings and input into that process about holding the Irish government account for meeting their own sustainable development goals. So again, like going to these things is a chance to talk about my research and the work of the Baby Feeding Law Group. And again, it came about from building relationships and networking on social media. But again, I couldn't have predicted it. So these are some of the media opportunities that I got as a result of it. So again, one of the challenging things about media, you'll never pick the headline yourself. But I wrote this article for the Irish Examiner. It's probably still Googleable because sometimes I still need to Google it myself to find it. But again, in that article, I kind of, made it a bit of a personal article, writing about my own experience and how the research came about. And again, it's just that social or that science communication skill of taking a big piece of research and distilling it down into much, much shorter, media-friendly article while still retaining the same information. And we also submitted an article, myself and a few of the co-authors wrote an article for RTE Brainstorm about our research. So again, RTE Brainstorm is a fantastic platform, just in case you haven't heard of it, that academics, mainly in Ireland, write short op-eds or blogs about their research. And again, it's just in that very conversational, non-academic style. So you do need to pitch it, and it won't be accepted if you're being incredibly wordy and lofty about it. So you do really need to understand how to distill your message. But it's a very nice read, and I recommend it just for your general entertainment. So I've shared some of them along the way, but this is kind of my insights from, I suppose, the whole process. And I suppose, like, my big one is be the change. Like, social media can be horrible, but you don't have to be horrible. And I know that's kind of starting from a very negative point of view, but you can decide that you're going to uplift and support people, and you're only going to put positive things out into the world, and you don't have to fight with people to be on social media. There's lots of people on social media who are very kind and very supportive. So in a way, it's something not to be afraid of, because you can say, I'm going to put something positive out into the world, and I'm not, if somebody is being mean to you, you can fully block them, like you have that button on most social media platforms and you can use it as much as you want. The big thing is it is work. So do not underestimate, no matter what platform you're using, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, whatever next, Snapchat, whatever the next big thing in social media is. Again, when I was starting out tweeting, a good post would take anything from half an hour to an hour to come up with. And that's between taking the photo, if you've taken a series of photos, which one do you like best? I would also fully recommend for inclusivity, including alt text on photos. So again, that's alternative text to make sure that they can be read by screen readers, using camel case hashtags. So again, saying like an example of camel case would be if I was saying hashtag my insights, I'd be capitalizing the M and the I. So all those things, they take work. So if you are thinking of, I suppose, doing social media, whether it's as an individual lactation consultant or as an organization, if you start doing that work, where does the time come from, or what do you cut? Just don't underestimate how much work it is. Definitely, it's social media, it's there to be social. So don't just think of it as, which is very easy to do starting out, I want to get attention for myself, I'm here to learn, I'm here to champion others. And, even when I was in my university, my own approach was I'm part of a research center. So when I'm trying to build my own platform, I don't have to worry all the time about posting regularly. I can just tag my research center and be their content. And then, the people in the marketing department loved that because it meant they had something to talk about. So again, you are an organization and you can decide that, say if you're an individual lactation consultant, that you don't want to publish or post regularly or be on a particular platform all the time. But you can say, okay, maybe I'll do something every couple of weeks, but I'll tag, ALCI, and then that's their content that they can use. So, you can think about how much or how little effort you want to put in. And don't underestimate the value of it again from a social point of view. Like if you're an Irish association, you're obviously everybody is around the country. You can use it to keep up to date with what you're doing yourselves. Like, oh, this person in Galway is doing this. And it's a nice way, again, like people talk about social media bubbles, and that's not necessarily a bad thing to be, in a bubble and just posting and you're all liking your own stuff and commenting on your own stuff. But that can sometimes be the thing that builds the platform and helps. Like algorithms will always be a dark art, but when you're social with each other, that has value as well. I think preaching to the converted, again, it's one of these things that can often be criticized. But I think if we compare it, when you think about preaching, if you compare with mass, you'd have to go to mass once a week and, you might forget the messages and then you go back and you need to hear the message again. So I think when you preach to converted, even myself, like I might already think of something, but somebody will say something and it'll just, it'll encourage me and it'll embolden me to take more action. So just because somebody's on your side, it doesn't mean that they don't need to hear what you have to say. Somebody, especially in an area like breastfeeding, where it's almost that feeling that people are on the back foot with their advocacy, somebody could be feeling a little bit down about what they're doing, or is it worth it? And then you say something and then that brings that person up. So again, don't be afraid or see some of these things like being in a bubble or just preaching to the converted. Don't see it as a negative because you're still supporting other people. So that's just my own insights. And I suppose the slide I'm going to end on is things to consider for yourselves. And I suppose this kind of comes back to when I was talking to Anya about preparing this talk, that it wasn't necessarily a training. It was just more like my story that I've used social media. I suppose it has helped further my career. It has helped, draw attention for my own research. And I suppose just to kind of share that experience with you rather than saying this is what you need to do to be successful on social media. I would recommend considering what you want out of social media as a next step from talking to me. So here's a few things. Yeah, what I was just mentioning. What do you want? And that's something that I can't answer for you. And it's something that a social media trainer probably can't answer for you as well. But it's something that somebody could potentially workshop with you. And again, who is your audience? Are you happy to, maybe are deciding that you're going to use it to connect with each other? Or is there a particular message? This comes back to, what do you want? Who do you want to know about what you want so you can achieve that? And where are they? And this is tough because I suppose social media has changed in the past couple of years in a professional capacity, which is, I kind of do have separate personal and professional social media. And like, it's rare enough that unless I was kind of doing something very fancy, I wouldn't really post about work on my personal social media. Like, I'd have definitely posted when I published that paper because I was so excited about it. But that would have been the only paper. Like, other papers, as exciting as they were, I wouldn't have posted them on my personal page. So again, where are they? I've seen a lot of the Twitter people migrate to LinkedIn. I made that migration myself. I'm barely on Twitter now, but I do a lot of the showing off that I used to do on Twitter. I do that on LinkedIn now. And other people, so I suppose LinkedIn is still probably the most professional space, but I have seen a lot of science communicators, which is kind of the area I'd be more familiar with. I've seen a lot of people use Instagram very well. Facebook, less so, but for some audiences, it's incredibly relevant. I have, in my own work, I'm in Munster Technological University at the moment. We have a research project with older adults, and I suppose a lot of that demographic are on Facebook. So again, it's considering, where is your audience? And, maybe if you were talking to teenagers, it might be a social media platform that I haven't actually heard of because I don't have teenagers. They're not in my life in a big way. So again, it's just, where is your audience, and kind of try out different platforms to potentially see where people are and what they're talking about. And definitely, I suppose, get used to your own bubble first before you break out of it. And I suppose the benefit of having a very low amount of followers is that, you can make your mistakes and try things out and see what's successful and what isn't, and what resonates and what doesn't. And if the things you don't want to resonate are resonating, then you can kind of reflect on why. But I suppose those would be the next things to consider for yourselves and to workshop for yourselves. So I'm going to finish up there. And again, I just want to say thank you very much to Anya, and I hope you've all found this helpful. It's been an interesting process to actually pull it all together and see how far it has actually brought me, and how much I do actually really enjoy being on social media. Like, it definitely has its downsides and there's a lot of negative press around it, but it can be very enjoyable, not just for yourself, but to see what other people are doing as well. I think just the main thing to remember is that it is social, and that part, if you like being social, then that can definitely be fun. So yeah, so I hope you enjoy it, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you on the Q&A. Okay, bye-bye.